The air in the West Wing on Friday, January 9, 2026, was thick with an unnatural quiet, the kind that often precedes a storm. Just after noon, a procession of 17 senior members of Congress, a rare bipartisan phalanx of power, walked with grim purpose to the White House. They were not there for a photo opportunity or a routine briefing. They carried a single 7-page document sealed in a stark manila envelope. This was not a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. The document, delivered directly to the president's chief of staff, contained a demand that was both simple and seismic. President Donald Trump had 72 hours to sign a binding memorandum that would fundamentally restrict his powers as commander-in-chief for the remainder of his term. The clock was ticking, set to expire at midnight on Sunday. This was a moment unlike any other in modern American history. The group that presented the ultimatum was a powerful cross-section of congressional leadership. It included the chairs and ranking members from the most critical committees in both the House and the Senate. Media group, committee chairs in a formal meeting room, montage of House and Senate committee rooms I stock and distribute equally. Armed services, foreign affairs, intelligence, and judiciary. These were the people responsible for funding the military, overseeing intelligence agencies, and authorizing the use of force. For years they had watched as presidential power grew, often at the expense of Congress. Now, united by a shared sense of crisis, Democrats and Republicans had joined forces to draw a line in the sand, an act of institutional self-preservation against a president they believed was acting without restraint. The gravity of the situation was palpable. The lawmakers who delivered the message did not smile or engage in small talk. Their faces were etched with the seriousness of their mission. They represented a constitutional co-equal branch of government reasserting its authority. The ultimatum was a direct challenge to the president's vision of a chief executive with unchecked power, particularly in the realm of foreign policy and military action. It sought to reclaim the powers that the Constitution had originally granted to the legislative branch. The power to declare war, to control the nation's finances, and to provide meaningful oversight of the executive. The 72-hour deadline was not arbitrary. It was designed to force an immediate crisis and prevent a prolonged political battle. The document itself was a carefully crafted legal and political weapon. It was not a bill that could be vetoed, or a resolution that could be ignored. It was a direct demand for the president to willingly sign away a measure of his own authority, binding himself to a new set of rules for the rest of his presidency. The message was clear: Congress would no longer be a passive observer. The era of unilateral presidential action, of secret raids, and unnotified troop movements had to end. The envelope sitting on the resolute desk was more than just paper. It was a constitutional showdown, a high-stakes gamble that would force the president into a corner and set the stage for a conflict that could redefine the limits of American power. Inside the 7-page memorandum was a set of 4 new, ironclad rules designed to act as chains on the president's executive authority. These were not suggestions or polite requests. They were strict, legally binding protocols that would require congressional partnership on nearly every major national security decision. The lawmakers had grown tired of learning about critical military operations and foreign policy shifts from news reports or after-the-fact briefings. They intended to put themselves back in the room where decisions were made. The ultimatum's core purpose was to re-establish the checks and balances that they felt had been dangerously eroded, creating a system where the president could not act alone on the world stage without explicit consent from the people's representatives. The first rule aimed directly at the president's ability to deploy American service members. It stated that any movement of more than 100 troops outside of already approved combat zones would require immediate written notification to Congress. More importantly, it demanded pre-approval from at least 3 of the 4 major defense committees before those troops could even be sent. The second rule targeted the president's use of economic warfare. It mandated that any new package of sanctions projected to have a global economic impact of more than $10 billion would need explicit authorization from the Banking and Foreign Affairs Committees of both the House and the Senate. This would prevent the president from unilaterally disrupting the world economy. The third rule was perhaps the most restrictive, placing firm limits on the president's power to order direct military strikes. It flatly prohibited any kinetic action, such as drone strikes, special operations raids, or cyber attacks, against a specific list of high-value targets without a new authorization for use of military force or a formal declaration of war from Congress. The list of forbidden targets included the leaders of Iran, high-ranking Chinese military officers, and the heads of Mexican cartels, among others. This was a direct response to a series of covert actions that had risked wider wars without any public or legislative debate, reining in the president's authority as a global enforcer. Finally, the fourth rule was designed to enforce radical transparency. It demanded that all future requests for emergency military or intelligence funding be accompanied by a declassified cost-to-effect matrix posted online for the public to see within 48 hours. This matrix would have to show in stark detail the projected costs in both dollars and human lives. It would itemize the estimated number of American soldiers expected to be killed, wounded, or missing in action for any proposed operation. The rule explicitly forbade the use of classified attachments to hide these grim projections from the American people. Congress was demanding that the true price of any military action be made public before it was paid. The first rule detailed in the congressional ultimatum was a direct assault on the modern imperial presidency's ability to move military forces around the globe like pieces on a chessboard. It specifically targeted what lawmakers saw as a pattern of mission creep and unannounced deployments. The rule stated that any deployment of more than 100 uniformed personnel outside of currently authorized theaters of operation, such as Iraq or Afghanistan, would require real-time written notification to 4 key defense committees. This alone was a significant change, but the rule went much further. It mandated that the deployment could not proceed without pre-approval from at least 3 of those committees. This effectively gave a small group of senior lawmakers a veto over the president's military orders. This new restriction was designed to prevent the executive branch from slowly escalating a military presence in a new region without any public debate or congressional buy-in. Lawmakers were tired of discovering that hundreds of U.S. troops had been sent to a potential hotspot in Africa or a tense border in Eastern Europe only after the fact. By setting the threshold at a low number of 100 personnel, Congress ensured it would be involved in the earliest stages of any new military engagement. This was a clear attempt to reclaim the war-making powers granted to Congress by the Constitution, forcing the president to justify even minor troop movements before they could create an irreversible international incident or draw the nation closer to an undeclared war. The second rule focused on a different kind of power: economic warfare. In the modern era, sanctions have become a primary tool of foreign policy, capable of crippling entire nations without firing a single shot. The ultimatum addressed this by stipulating that any new sanctions package with a projected global economic impact exceeding $10 billion in its first 2 years must receive explicit joint authorization from the Banking and Foreign Affairs Committees of both chambers. This provision was aimed at preventing the president from unilaterally imposing massive economic penalties that could destabilize global markets, harm American allies, and provoke unpredictable reactions from adversaries, all without congressional consultation. By setting a $10 billion threshold, Congress was not concerned with minor targeted sanctions against individuals or small entities. Instead, they were focused on the kind of sweeping, countrywide sanctions that could be considered acts of war in their own right. Lawmakers argued that decisions with such far-reaching consequences for the American and global economies should not be made by one person in the Oval Office. They wanted to ensure that the potential blowback of such powerful economic weapons, from retaliatory tariffs to disruptions in the global energy supply, was fully debated and approved by the elected representatives who would have to deal with the fallout. This rule was about shared responsibility for wielding one of the most powerful non-military tools in America's arsenal. The third rule outlined in the ultimatum was the most direct and audacious limit on the president's role as commander-in-chief. It was a clear prohibition on the president's ability to order kinetic action against specific high-value targets. This meant no more unilateral decisions to launch drone strikes, special operations raids, or offensive cyber attacks against the leadership of other nations or powerful non-state groups. The rule created a list of explicitly protected targets, who could only be attacked after Congress passed a new authorization for use of military force, or issued a formal declaration of war. This was a bold move to take the president's finger off the trigger in the most sensitive and potentially explosive scenarios. The list of prohibited targets was remarkably specific and revealed the precise fears of the congressional leaders. It included Iran's supreme leader and the Command Council of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a direct response to past escalations in the Middle East. It also named any flag or general-grade officers of China's People's Liberation Army, a measure designed to prevent an accidental slide into a great power conflict. Shockingly, it also included the leadership of Mexican cartels that had been designated as foreign terrorist organizations, and, most broadly, any sitting head of a state recognized by the United Nations. This rule effectively ended the era of the targeted assassination as a tool of presidential whim. The fourth and final rule was a revolutionary demand for transparency, aimed at forcing the government to be honest with the American people about the true cost of war. Under this rule, any future request for emergency funding, whether for military operations, foreign aid, or intelligence activities, had to be accompanied by a fully declassified cost-to-effect matrix. This document, required to be posted online for public viewing within 48 hours, would strip away the secrecy that often surrounds military spending. It would force the administration to lay out the projected dollar costs of an operation, broken down by category for everyone to see. No longer could billions be moved around in opaque supplemental bills. Even more profoundly, the matrix had to include the projected human cost. The administration would be required to publicly state the estimated number of American military fatalities, wounded personnel, and soldiers missing in action for any proposed operation. The rule went so far as to ban the use of classified annexes to hide these grim figures. This meant the president could no longer go to Congress or the American people and ask for support for a military action without first providing a clear, honest, and public estimate of how many American lives it might cost. It was a radical commitment to accountability, ensuring that any decision to send men and women into harm's way would be made with full public knowledge of the potential sacrifice. Congress did not concoct this dramatic ultimatum in a vacuum. It was really the culmination of a year of escalating alarm, a direct reaction to what lawmakers saw as a pattern of dangerous and reckless behavior by the president. Since his inauguration in January 2025, President Trump had authorized at least 14 major unnotified kinetic actions, military operations where Congress was only informed after the fact, if at all. This series of secret strikes and raids, conducted without legislative consultation, had pushed the bipartisan leadership to a breaking point. They believed the president was, in effect, treating the U.S. military as his own private security force, risking wider wars for objectives that had never been debated or approved by the American people's representatives. Several specific incidents, stood out as particularly egregious. In March 2025, an unnotified U.S. airstrike targeted a convoy near the Syrian border believed to be carrying members of Iran's IRGC. The strike killed 41 people and brought the United States to the brink of a direct conflict with Iran. Yet members of the Armed Services Committee first learned the full details from classified intelligence leaks days later. Then, on July 9, 2025, a secret special operations raid deep inside Mexico against the Sinaloa cartel went horribly wrong. 2 highly decorated Navy SEALs were killed in the firefight, and the unauthorized incursion caused a major diplomatic crisis with the Mexican government, which was outraged by the violation of its sovereignty. The provocations just continued to escalate throughout the year. On Halloween night, October 31, 2025, a U.S. Navy surface action group in the South China Sea engaged and sank 2 Chinese-flagged vessels described as maritime militia. The incident was a significant escalation with a nuclear-armed power, yet, key leaders in Congress were not given prior notice. The potential for a catastrophic miscalculation was immense. The final straw for many came on December 22, 2025, when commercial satellite photos revealed a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone circling a compound in Venezuela. It was later confirmed that this was part of a covert Delta Force operation to extract the deposed leader, Nicolas Maduro, an act that many saw as a flagrant violation of international law. These events taken together really painted a picture of a presidency unbound by traditional norms or legal constraints. The bipartisan group of lawmakers felt they had been repeatedly sidelined and ignored. They argued that the president was making life and death decisions that constitutionally belonged, at least in part, to them. The ultimatum was not just about reining in Donald Trump. It was about stopping what they saw as a dangerous precedent. If any president could unilaterally order strikes against Iran, conduct raids in Mexico, sink Chinese ships, and carry out extractions in Venezuela, all without a single vote or hearing in Congress, then the legislative branch's role in foreign policy and war had, well, basically become meaningless. When the ultimatum was presented to President Trump, his reaction was not just angry, it was, according to sources in the room, volcanic. The president was in the Situation Room for a briefing when he was handed the 7-page document. As he read the 4 demands, his face reportedly turned a deep shade of red. He launched into a tirade that lasted for 43 minutes, a furious monologue directed at the lawmakers, his own staff, and the perceived betrayal by members of his own party. He began pacing the length of the room, his voice growing louder with each step, denouncing the ultimatum as a personal and political attack of the highest order. Witnesses described a scene of pure rage. The president slammed his fist down on the heavy conference table with such force that he cracked the protective glass covering a framed photograph from his 2025 inauguration. He accused the 17 congressional signatories of attempting to handcuff America and render the nation powerless on the world stage. He saw the document not as a constitutional check on his power, but as a treasonous plot to undermine his authority as commander-in-chief. He felt the Congress was trying to micromanage the presidency and prevent him from acting decisively to protect American interests, a role he believed the voters had elected him to perform without interference. His fury was particularly intense for the Republicans who had signed the letter. He saw their participation not as a matter of principle, but as a profound act of disloyalty. He reportedly singled out one senior Republican committee chairman by name, calling him a Judas with a gavel and vowing to end his political career. The president shouted that these lawmakers were weak and naive, that they did not understand the dangers the country faced, or the speed with which he needed to act. He insisted that seeking committee approval before a raid or a drone strike would lead to leaks and get American soldiers killed, an argument he had made many times before. Shortly after the private outburst, the White House issued a terse and defiant public statement that captured the president's mood. It declared that the president will not be lectured, threatened, or shackled by a group of politicians in Washington. The statement framed the ultimatum as an unconstitutional power grab by Congress and an attempt to weaken the nation in the eyes of its enemies. There was no hint of compromise or negotiation. The message from the White House was one of absolute rejection. The president was digging in for a fight, ready to challenge Congress directly and take his case to the American people, setting the stage for a constitutional crisis of unprecedented proportions. The 17 congressional leaders who delivered the ultimatum did not come unprepared for the president's defiance. They had anticipated his refusal and had already planned their response, building a political doomsday device set to detonate the moment the 72-hour deadline passed. If President Trump did not sign the memorandum by midnight on Sunday, the signatories pre-committed to triggering 2 immediate and powerful actions. These were not mere political threats. They were legislative maneuvers designed to paralyze key functions of the president's foreign and military policy apparatus, forcing a confrontation that would ripple through the entire government. This was the consequence for calling their bluff. The first action would be the introduction of a concurrent resolution under the War Powers Resolution of 1973. This powerful, if rarely used legislative tool would force the withdrawal of all United States military forces that had been deployed without proper congressional notification since the start of his term on January 20, 2025. This could potentially affect thousands of troops in various undeclared hotspots around the world. Because it would be a concurrent resolution, it would not require the president's signature to pass, presenting a direct challenge to his command. This would set off a frantic and contentious debate on the floor of the House and Senate, putting every member of Congress on the record. Did they support the president's unilateral actions or the authority of Congress? The second, and perhaps more immediate consequence would be a massive funding freeze. The lawmakers pledged to place a legislative hold on an estimated $187 billion in unobligated funds across several critical government accounts. This would instantly freeze money in the Department of Defense's Overseas Contingency Operations account, the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program, the intelligence community's secretive black budget, and even the Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund. This would choke off the very funds the president relies on to conduct special military operations, provide aid to allies, and respond to international financial crises. The Pentagon and intelligence agencies would suddenly find their flexible funding sources locked up, severely hampering their ability to operate. The standoff created two starkly different paths. If President Trump signed the memorandum, he would be seen as capitulating to Congress, a move that would enrage his base and project an image of weakness. He would be forced to govern for the rest of his term with his hands tied, unable to make the bold, unilateral moves that had defined his presidency. However, if he refused to sign, he would trigger an immediate constitutional crisis. The government would be thrown into chaos as Congress moved to defund his policies and force troop withdrawals, all while the world watched America's political system tear itself apart. The president was caught between humiliation and open warfare with his own government. The news of the 72-hour ultimatum sent immediate and powerful shockwaves far beyond the Beltway, rattling global financial markets and sowing confusion and anxiety in capitals around the world. On Wall Street, the reaction was swift and brutal. In after-hours trading on Friday, stocks for America's largest defense contractors plummeted. Giants like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing saw their values fall between 7% and 16%. Investors panicked at the prospect of a massive legislative hold on defense spending and the new restrictive rules that could slow down or cancel lucrative weapons sales and military contracts for the foreseeable future. The ultimatum was a direct threat to the financial lifeblood of the military-industrial complex. The geopolitical turmoil was even more profound. America's allies, particularly those who depend heavily on United States security guarantees, were thrown into a state of alarm. Governments in Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine, all facing immediate and existential threats, scrambled to get clarity from Washington. Their leaders worried that the political infighting would lead to a paralyzed and unreliable America. Would United States commitments still be honored? Could they still count on American intelligence and military support? The ultimatum's rule requiring public disclosure of projected United States casualties for any operation was particularly concerning, as allies feared it would make any future American intervention on their behalf politically impossible. The Pentagon and the United States military establishment were caught in an impossible position, trapped between their commander-in-chief and the Congress that funds them. Senior military leaders were deeply concerned that a protracted fight would damage readiness, disrupt operations, and sow confusion within the ranks. A legislative hold on $187 billion would not just stop future plans, it could disrupt ongoing missions that rely on flexible contingency funds. The prospect of being forced by Congress to withdraw troops that the president had ordered to deploy created a nightmare scenario of conflicting legal orders, threatening the military's sacred principle of civilian control. There was a palpable fear of a breakdown in the chain of command. Meanwhile, the crisis was causing deep fractures within the Republican Party. While the president demanded absolute loyalty, a growing number of GOP lawmakers were signaling their support for the ultimatum. At least 8 House members and 4 senators publicly stated they would vote to sustain the funding hold if the president refused to sign. Party whips began conducting frantic vote counts, and the math suggested that a veto override on related legislation might actually be feasible if all Democrats and a critical mass of Republicans voted together. The party was being torn between loyalty to their president and their constitutional duties, a conflict that threatened to shatter the GOP's fragile unity and reshape the political landscape. This 72-hour showdown between President Trump and Congress is more than just another political battle in Washington. It represents a fundamental moment of reckoning for American democracy. At its heart, this is a conflict over the very nature of presidential power, a question that has been debated since the nation's founding. Has the presidency grown too powerful, too imperial, especially in its ability to wage war and conduct foreign policy? Or does the modern world, with its fast-moving threats, require a chief executive who can act with speed and decisiveness, unburdened by a slow and deliberative Congress? The outcome of this crisis will reverberate for generations, setting a new precedent for the balance of power between the White House and Capitol Hill. The confrontation forces a necessary, if painful, conversation about America's role in the world. For decades, the United States has acted as the globe's policeman, a role that has increasingly been carried out through executive orders, clandestine operations, and military deployments authorized by presidents with minimal public debate. The ultimatum from Congress is a direct challenge to this status quo. It asks whether the American people and their elected representatives should have a greater say in when, where, and why the nation goes to war or imposes its will on others. A victory for Congress could lead to a more restrained, cautious, and democratic foreign policy, while a victory for the president would further solidify the model of a globally active, unilateral executive. Regardless of whether Trump signs the document, the damage may already be done. The public spectacle of a deeply divided American government has sent a message of instability to both allies and adversaries. Friends of the United States are questioning its reliability as a partner, wondering if security commitments can survive the country's vicious internal politics. Meanwhile, rivals like Russia and China are likely watching with satisfaction, seeing the world's leading democracy consumed by infighting and constitutional chaos. This internal struggle risks diminishing America's standing and influence on the global stage, creating a power vacuum that other, more authoritarian nations will be eager to fill. Ultimately, the nation stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward a reassertion of legislative authority where the power to make monumental decisions about war and peace is shared, debated, and transparent. This path may be slower and more cumbersome, but its proponents argue it is safer and more democratic. The other path continues the trend toward a more powerful, agile, and secretive executive, capable of acting instantly but with fewer checks on its authority. This path may seem more efficient in a dangerous world, but it risks leading to overreach, miscalculation, and wars fought without national consensus. The choice made in these tense 72 hours will not just define a presidency. It will help define the future of the American Republic and its place in the world.